Hello, Sage here on the Sage channel, and we're here back in Star Citizen to do another extremely close look, and this one should be much quicker than the previous ones because, well, message received, people said they didn't like the super long-winded, I'm going to describe everything I'm seeing for the blind way of doing things, and I can't blame you. So, let's get straight to it, and let's inspect this lovely ship at a rather quicker speed. This in front of us is the Drake Buccaneer, a pretty heavily armed ship designed to be a single-seater glass cannon. On top of it, it has a size 4 mount, which means you can have a hefty cannon up there, or as it has now, a turret with 2 size 2 weapons on it. Also has a size 3 mount here, which currently has a gimbal as well as a size 2 weapon, and then it's got a size 1 little mount right here, so you can have your own little dinky weapons of doom here as well. So very hefty ship, as well as some missile mounts under the wings right there. The ship itself is a rather boxy ship designed by Drake Interplanetary, at least that's the in-game lore, and it is by far one of my favorite ships, as it does in a lot of ways have a very boxy and bulky look to it that I absolutely adore. If we go ahead and start our closer inspection tour, we're going to move up to the front, where you'll find it has a lot of windows on the dang thing, actually quite a few windows. Even this tiny little cute window at the very front. Some of these, in fact most of them, don't make much sense necessarily, because when you're sitting in there you cannot actually view down out of these bottom windows, but nonetheless it does keep up with the original concept of having a very, well, good field of view when you're sitting in there, and a lot of glass, so it keeps that all up. In fact, we could go ahead and lay down here, and you can see on the belly of the beast, they've gone ahead and put a lot of geometry detail in here to break it up with all these bits jutting out, and keeping the same design language of having sort of square designs and shapes and everything, before it carries on backwards with even more little breakup to detail, including maneuvering thrusters with a keep clear stickers and all that fun stuff there, and even color breakup. Well, not necessarily color breakup, but lighting changes going from the dark metals to the lighter metals. And of course, as per usual on these ships, lots of texture work with a lot of paneling in the texturing. Before we get down here to the landing gear, and something I noticed on this ship that you don't see a lot is the landing gear, yes indeed, does have a bunch of beautiful detail that's actually been modeled in, as well as bunches of decal textures and whatnot to give it little bolts and all these other little things. But the area up here actually looks like it has a fair amount of detail in the landing gear hub. So when it lifts up, it's actually going into a pretty well modeled area, which I assume once the doors close, they'll coal all of this out so it's not causing render issues. Heck, it's even got a nice little beautiful light in there. It's a beautiful landing gear overall, and well, that's pretty standard for most ships they build, and I'm not seeing really any notable graphics issues. Backing out and standing back up and inspecting the ship from this side so we don't get the interact prompt to hop in the cockpit, we'll carry on looking down the front of the ship. You can't really see too much behind this glass, which is fine, but I did currently find there's a glitch where we can shove our face in here and look in onto the underbelly of the ship, and you can see all of the interesting detail they have on the left and right there. These are sort of, I believe, partially their damaged state, so when the outer hull of the ship gets blown away, you will be able to see that, which is pretty cool that it's there. A little disconcerting maybe that's showing up now, but it's a good chance we'll be able to see it while we're in the cockpit, which might be why we're able to see it right now. Anyhow, carrying on, more and more details along the ship, lots of little decals for pull open panels, another little tiny maneuvering thruster of joy, and that's where we get this huge shiny metal panel here with a lot of geometry detail on it, where it's basically hugging the shape of the ship where it bounces out here almost at a triangular shape. But it also has its own details in breaking it up with the shinier metal part right here, followed by the slightly darker metal, and of course the fact that it bumps down on the bottom there. Sort of, well, echoing the shape of this thruster. All these nice little things pull it all together before it leads back into the main body of the ship, where we do have this vent up here as well as the one down here. And these two vents sort of compose like two large chunks of the main ship body as they go back to the back of the ship and slowly start moving themselves up, but keeping that same design language of harder angles and more of a boxy shape. You can even see there's some awesome little detail that they've actually modeled in right here between those two large pieces. That way it doesn't become just a bland area, including some support struts that they sort of have stuck in here, which actually appear to have geometry or at least a false geometry, the decals that give you a sense of depth behind them sort of push it back like they're actually dented into there. I think it is decals because it does look like it's not holding exactly right, but that could be my eyes. Coming to the back of the ship, we have another landing gear area, and this one I really noticed because it is such a large landing gear. They definitely spent some time on the area where it will be disappearing into, since it is a very nice little space. Some of the earlier concept arts had very different landing gears on this ship, but overall I'm fine with what they ended up with, because it means they can put a lot of detail into their landing gear, like this big beautiful machine in front of us, and not have to worry about that geometry causing lag issues, since once you take off, in theory you'll be telling your landing gears to tuck into your ship. Also have two nice shiny metal doors on this, and all the geometry here is pretty well modeled out, even if we're getting some weirdness on this right now when we move like this, where it's fake depth on these panels here, and it starts to fall apart when we get to this angle, which is a little bit unfortunate. Do wish they could model it all in instead of having the fake depth, but well, I guess that's something we're going to have to settle for, isn't it? Or else everything would just lag out to no end. Anyway, moving on from there, we do come to the wings that jut out. Rather simplistic wings. In fact, we can really see the shape of the wing right here, where it ends before turning into a different type of wing. It is really just a rectangular thing with a circular outer edge on both of them. Pretty simple and straightforward, really, almost like modern planes in a way. And it does get a little wonky right here, where you can see that's a bit of a bump in, but it does seem to work relatively well, and it's not something I would actually say would need to be fixed. It's just character for the ship, that little ugly bump right there, as if maybe there was some piping and stuff under it, or a support beam that they've screwed into. And of course it does have this almost puck right here, which connects the wing itself sort of to the thruster section, and the same with this sort of cowling right here before it goes to the main ship, even though I think it would be a little bit nice if we had something else breaking this up rather than just this darker line, but I think it's overall fine. Before we head out the rest of the way, I guess we should finish up the very back of the ship right here, and that's where we have all sorts of very interesting detail, including a light, including, well, it almost looks like a warnings triangular sign there in the center, and of course lots of little metal clamps that are going in and out of all of this negative space that pushes into the ship here. It's a very, very interesting breakup, and something I quite adore, all the little details at the back. I wish I could go ahead and actually close the landing gears from right here, but I don't believe we can do that. We'll take it for a flight in a minute. It also has two more little silly wings sticking out, which usually wings bother me a lot, but these two don't really bother me just because of how sharp their angles are, and they have these almost little structural ribs going across them, which I really quite like, before of course having a different colored piece of metal that is actually, I believe, a joint that then connects into the rest of the ship. And you can see they've even indented this larger metal section that was connected to the intake vent at the front to give it more detail where it holds it all together. Moving on to the thrusters here, we have a bunch of these beautiful little blades, which actually have their own little piston things in them. Hopefully these will all animate once we're flying about, and these of course will open and close around the main thruster here. The main thruster itself does have some nice detail in the inside of it, and I don't see any weird texture stretching. In fact, some of these textures I'm not sure I've even seen before. It's nice to see, well, not the exact same thing used over and over again on Drake ships, but to see some variety. There are some familiar textures reused here, though, and possibly, unfortunately, one world hole. Let's see if I can get that mouse up. Looks like maybe right here between these where it's not exactly connecting correctly. Moving on back some more, we got some beautiful pipe work here to give it some details. And some weird little puckiness sticking out, connecting it all together, very nice, as well as a smaller thruster area, and then the larger cowling around that, a very nice detail, and a great way to give it some more character and detail. Heading back from there, we have this almost little outcropping here, which is almost like, I don't know, I have no idea what its purpose is, but it almost looks like another intake and output there, and above that we have, well, the main thruster body. In fact, we can use our mouse to really point out just the beauty that is all these little pieces here that sort of clamp around the main body. It's not just one piece of geometry. Very nice. And of course, the front and back of the thruster are sort of separated by color as well as texture and some geometry breakup before it gets to this main entrance point, which is just a heck of an interesting thing, isn't it? With all these different cylindrical or almost, well, yeah, cylindrical pieces leading to that very middle piece, which isn't just a dome or, again, a cylindrical thing. It's got the nice little details stuck on the four main directions of it. Pretty nice. Before, of course, we continue out this way more to another relatively standard wing with nice little armor pucks sort of stuck onto it to hold it together. I think some of the detail here isn't actually modeled in, to be exact, that sort of indentation behind those. Because it seems like when we move the camera it might be getting a bit silly, but I can't tell for sure, so which means it's probably working fine. And then we have a little lights on the corner, which actually has its own glass cowling around it, which I think is a nice little touch. And that should be, oh, another little glass thing there, which should be, again, the same on the other side. And I'm assuming, yep, different color light. Very, very nice. Overall, this is a beautiful ship that I absolutely adore. And it has so much detail, even on simple things like this, where they have the metal cutting down, and they took time to put in little details like this, where it's actually cutting in. Instead of just pushing geometry through itself, they actually make sure everything is not intersecting in an incorrect manner. The only thing I wish would sort of intersect is, honestly, these right here. This line, I wish this would sort of push into it a little bit more, or have some sort of welding gap. Because it does feel a little bit wrong, especially on this right here, where it comes to such a flat stop right here, where it's just a flat surface. That's probably the only thing I really can complain about on this ship right there. Let's go ahead and hop in the cockpit now and see how that looks. You can see this ladder pops out, folds up, and then releases itself downwards. Pretty awesome. We can hop in the cockpit, we can look up and see. Feel like we're jumping inside an X-Wing. Absolutely love the square bulkiness of this ship. It is by far one of my favorites, and as I think I've said maybe 3 times now, I am planning on keeping it. Looking down, you cannot see all that detail we thought we might be able to see, but you can see, well, an awful lot of detail in this cockpit. In fact, we could probably use our mouse to look around more easily, as the controller seems to auto-reset our view back to the middle at this point. But beautiful consoles, which we've seen very similar before. Lots of lovely buttons that are actually modeled in and look like they're not freaking out like some of the earlier ship buttons did. Even though that little radar thing seems like it might. The compass looks like it's sort of going a little crazy. And overall, a lot of really, really good detail, even including around the windows. You barely ever see the geometry in the ship, but you do notice a little bit in some of the rounded corners of the windows here. A lovely little light to the top left. You don't actually see the geometry there. It's just such a beautiful little light. I had to point it out. And all the cable work running across the whole ceiling, or I say ceiling, all of the edges of this ship. And of course, look at the view. It's a great field of view. If the field of view of your actual game character was higher, you could really, really enjoy this and get a sense of sitting in the ship. As it is, it's probably one of my favorite ships to fly. And by the way, just admire that cable work going around all these things. And that one just goes through the metal, but they actually have a little puck of detail on it. Absolutely beautiful. Anyway, I think that's about it we can do here. We'll go to the third person now. Press F4 again, and there we go. So now we can spin our camera up and really start to admire this ship here. There's the back section again that I was talking about, enjoying so much, and I love the darker cowling and the color breakup on it. Unlike some other ships, this is pretty much monotone in the fact that it doesn't actually have any other colors, but it does actually have the breakup from having lighter and darker grays on it, which who knows, maybe that's part of the reason I adore this ship so much, is because of course I myself am quite the fan of gray. And look at this design of this ship, it is truly a beautiful thing. The cockpit almost sticks out a bit far for my taste, but I'm also alright with it because then it is a beautiful ship reaching forward, but I also just adore those large thrusters and those wings that connect them where it looks sort of frail like that. When you pan the camera up, you see those 2 larger, almost intake thruster things between the main engines and the body of the ship. This is a relatively small ship in the end of the day that packs a hell of a punch. And look at the thrusters. The thrusters themselves pretty much make up half of this ship's mass. If you were to put one thruster in front of the other, it would pretty much be the same size as the main body of this ship. It is an awesome little warship that I absolutely adore. It is just so dang beautiful. And I love the geometry, the way the cockpit slowly bows backwards towards the rest of the ship, spreading out almost like a wedge. And the fact that those intakes I mentioned, the lighter gray ones that are attached to the main body of the ship, sort of add so much more detail, but continue the same flow towards the back of the ship before it comes up to that point. Absolutely adore this ship. All the detail on top of the thrusters, the way the shiny metal from the wing right on the closest side of this thruster then reaches over the thruster itself. Absolutely beautiful. My only complaint in this very moment is the fact that the spectator cam keeps swaying, which I really, really dislike. Yes, it even sways in this view. Very unfortunate. By the way, if we were to stick the camera down here, we can now go ahead and try to get a look at some of the details in the front cockpit area here around our somewhat silly looking person. And you can see there is just a ton of detail even in the area where we couldn't really see while walking around the ship or sitting in the cockpit. All these little bits of detail in front of the character, like the cables, like all the little support braces and ribbing you see running up the left and right of the ship. Absolutely gorgeous ship. By far one of my favorites, if not maybe my all-time favorite fighter at the moment. Absolutely adore it. Anyway, let's go ahead and let's take it for a little bit of a test flight, shall we? As soon as we finish admiring just that beautiful turret on top of it, it's like something I've seen on ArtStation. It just looks great. I love how bulky that turret is with a big square front and the darker ribs running in front of it like support braces, and I love that turret. I'd like to have that turret as a robotic friend who would just talk to me. Give him some arms and like a treaded bottom or something. Or maybe 8 legs or something awesome like that. Absolutely adore that turret. Anyway, actually to shoe stinger flying now. And here we are now in the cockpit of the Drake Buccaneer flying about. And we'll even go ahead and pop ourselves in the third person so you can see those beautiful thrusters firing. There we go, give it some boost. Absolutely gorgeous thing. I loaded up a Vandal Swarm map here, so we will have a little bit of combat if we wish to shoot. The trouble with this ship is, I say the trouble, remember it's sort of the idea that it's a glass cannon, so it can get pretty easily taken out if somebody gets a lucky shot on it, but Jesus Christ, look at that ship. Oh, I love it so much. I love it. Honestly, I wish you could remove the tiny little wings on the left and right side so it would just be sort of a square thing with the main cockpit sticking out, and stick those size 2 cannons with their gimbals onto the left and right sides of the turrets. But Jesus Christ, I love this thing. Such a beautiful, beautiful ship. Anyway, if I would like to demonstrate its firepower just a little tiny bit, we'll go ahead and hop ourselves back into first person, press Z so it can actually turn. Alrighty, Vandal target acquired. You might notice one of my respawns just dropped. We're not going to talk about that. Anyway, the ship has a pretty good armament of weapons. The big guns up top, these little guys here, and for the life of me, I can't figure... There we go, now it's firing the other little ones. So you can see, while we fire away, the thing has some serious kick to it. Let's zoom out, and there you go. So it's a pretty hefty ship, the amount of weapons on this tiny little thing. Anyway, let's go ahead and see if we can actually do some damage. That way you can see what it looks like when we do some damage with this thing. But please be warned, my aim is not the best in the universe. Let's go ahead and see. Can we just line it up a little tiny bit on this guy? You can see how I have our aim set up so I can just try to line that up, and right away you can see it's hitting and it's done some damage. So it is a pretty powerful ship. One last thing I want to show you guys is the missiles that it comes loaded out with. I know this isn't necessarily the part of the extremely close look like usual, but it's pretty cool. The missiles, they're awesome. So enemy acquired, missile locked, and away the missile goes. And any second now, the missile should do some real magical stuff. You might notice that my respawns dropped again. It's a glass cannon. I was standing still. Anyway, away the missile goes, and we should see that missile split into about, yep, a bunch of other missiles. It's absolutely awesome, the stuff this ship comes with by default. Absolutely adore this ship. Anyway, that'll be it for our extremely close... Fucking hell, that missile came back and got him. That was awesome. Anyway, that'll be it for our extremely close look of the Drake Buccaneer. Until the 10th, you can buy this ship and pretty much any other ship that Drake is putting out there. But remember, if you don't already have a game package, you're buying just a standalone ship, and the main idea of Star Citizen is the idea that you'll be able to earn all of these ships in-game. So don't go thinking you have to spend crazy amounts of money to earn these ships. Game's coming along, so hopefully someday in the not too distant future, you'll be able to actually go ahead and get your hands on these just by earning it in the game. Anyway, that's it. Thanks a bunch for watching, guys and gals. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll try to make sure these stay short in the future when I do extremely close looks. Hopefully even shorter than this. Anyway, once again, thank you a bunch for watching, and I shall see you all next time. Ta-ta.